It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical, our digital audience with us tonight. Good to see them. Among them, our guest, Professor Martha Bradley. We're changing it up a bit tonight. We are inviting you to give us a call. The number will pop up on your screen shortly. 011-714-0677-7879. That number again, 011-714-0677-7879. Give us a call. Looking forward to getting your take on this topic. Well, it's been described as an exceptional case of exceptional importance. South Africa is alleging violations by Israel of its obligations under the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And they're basically saying that the acts taken by the government and military of Israel against the people, the Palestinian people, in the wake of the October 7th attacks by Hamas are genocidal in character, right? Because they are intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the national, racial, and ethnic group. That's what they say. On the other hand, we heard context given by Israel's legal team this week. Seared in Israel's collective memory is the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, right? And given this history, we heard that Israel was among the first states to ratify the Genocide Convention without reservation, saying in oral arguments this week before the World Court that this is a war that it didn't start, nor did it want, and that they are simply defending themselves against, among others, Hamas. South Africa wants provisional measures to protect against further harm to the rights of the Palestinian people under the Genocide Convention. From what you've heard and seen this week, did South Africa make a strong enough case for the court to rule in its favor? Will the court indicate these provisional measures? South Africa's position is that Israel's response to the October 7th attacks by Hamas has crossed the line. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's hear from you. 011-714-0677-78 or 79. And as always, listen, we're not here to play sides. That's not the job. Our job is to give you the facts as we know it and give you context, which leads us to the question of the week. And we're asking you, what are your thoughts on the arguments made before the ICJ by South Africa as well as Israel? The question is there a plausible claim of genocidal intent? Important word. What will be the court's process in answering this question? We will find out. Also share your thoughts with us at It's Topical SABC on X. Perspective coming up. Now, from protests by both Palestinians and Israelis outside The Hague to the legal showdown inside the United Nations top court, this montage, compiled by producer Moklabe, highlights the events that got people talking in many places around the world. Take a look.
Many people have arrived here outside the International Court of Justice.
Stop bombing Gaza! Remember what Lamola has done to you. You remember and we are.
The first genocidal act committed by Israel is the mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, in violation of Article 2A of the Genocide Convention. As the UN Secretary General explained 5 weeks ago, the level of Israel's killing is so extensive that nowhere is safe in Gaza. As I stand before you today, 23,000 210 Palestinians have been killed.
These are the soldiers repeating the inciting words of their prime minister. Israel's special genocidal intent is rooted in the belief that, in fact, the enemy is not just the military wing of Hamas, or indeed Hamas generally, but is embedded in the fabric of Palestinian life in Gaza.
South Africa now respectfully and humbly calls on this honourable court to do what is in its power to do, to indicate the provisional measures that are so urgently required to prevent further irreparable harm to the Palestinian people in Gaza, whose hopes, including for their very survival, are now vested in this court.
Bring them home! Bring them home! Bring them home!
The applicant has now sought to invoke this term in the context of Israel's conduct in a war it did not start and did not want. A war in which Israel is defending itself against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist organizations whose brutality knows no bounds.
The application is so distorted in its descriptions that it prevents the court from properly assessing the plausibility of the rights asserted by South Africa. Plausibility cannot be determined based on the unsubstantiated allegations of one party to the proceedings alone. If Article 41 of the court statute is to have any meaning,
the conflict with Hamas poses serious operational and legal challenges. In conducting close-quarter urban combat while mitigating harm to the surroundings, in seeking to put a stop to Hamas military use of hospitals while minimizing disruption of medical services, in helping civilians leave areas of the most intense fighting while Hamas forces them to stay in the line of fire, in facilitating the provision of aid when that aid is constantly stolen by Hamas to sustain its military efforts.
The court will render its order on the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by South Africa as soon as possible. The agents of the parties will be advised in due course as to the date on which the court will deliver the order in public sitting. The sitting is declared closed.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to get into our discussions. We're going to get you context. We've got Sophie Mokoena here, who is SABC News International Editor. We also have got the Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, as well as Avrom Krengel. He's the president of the SA-Zionist Federation. And we're also going to get some analysis from Professor Martha Bradley, who is from UJ. More next. Stay with us. As always, we need to get you some context. Follow me. Let's do that. Head over to the magic wall. Big questions, right? Is there a plausible claim of genocidal intent? That is what the court needs to answer. Fresh from The Hague, Sophie Mokoena is with us. Thank you very much indeed for your time. You've just recently returned from this important court. So you have fresh eyes and insight in terms of what the inner workings are. But there's still this maybe some confusion in the public sphere as to what's the difference between the ICJ and the ICC. Break it down for us.
Well, the International Court of Justice was established in 1945. The intention was to address the challenges then, you know, the World War II. And then it has got 193 members. These are countries that are signatories to this court. Right. South Africa and Israel are signatories to this court. And it was easy for Israel to sign to this, because at that time you would recall what Hitler had done to the Jews, and then it settles the disputes between states, not individuals. And that is why the matter now, it is between South Africa and Israel. The two states are talking about this matter, and they want this court, the World Court, the UN Court, to come up with order whether, if there's intent in relation to the genocide, instruct Israel to halt its operations in Gaza. But that's not the only issue. There are other issues that include when you want to push people out of where they stay. It's part of genocide, because there's attempt to push the Palestinians out of their land. But also issues of humanitarian delivery that is not happening. And we know that the SG has always spoken about this, of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, here you deal with individuals that have committed crimes against humanity. And it was established in 2002. So look, South Africa was part of the establishment of this. And then it has got 123 members. It's a Rome Statute. South Africa went further to domesticate that Rome Statute. That is why when there was a matter of al-Bashir, everybody was saying, South Africa, you have no choice but to arrest him, because you didn't only sign up to the Rome Statute, you domesticated the Rome Statute. So these are the two different institutions.
I want you to just pause it there, Sophie. I need to go to the Minister of Justice. Follow me. He has another engagement. Sophie will break down further issues with regards to the big takeaways from South Africa as well as the Israeli team. Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, thank you very much indeed, sir, for your time. Fresh from The Hague. So appreciate it. I know you've got another engagement, so we will get this done and get some value added for the viewer. In hindsight, sir, with regards to, if anything that can be or you think should have been done differently in terms of South Africa's oral arguments before the ICJ or otherwise, would you have changed anything?
Thank you very much, and to the viewers of the Topical on SABC. No, we will not have changed anything. In fact, we believe that we have presented a compelling legal argument for the court to find in our favor. And you will also remember that because we knew that in terms of the rules of the court, we do not have a right of reply.
Yes.
So we also anticipated some of the arguments from the state of Israel, in particular the one of self-defense. And you will remember we argued in court that that will not apply to Israel as an occupier, and that is already there is jurisprudence to that effect of the court. And secondly, that we have condemned the actions of Hamas of the 7th of October, and in the whatever atrocities that might have been committed, there is also jurisprudence of the court to the effect that there is nothing that can justify a genocidal intent or activities. So all those are points that Israel in their response tried to argue before the court, and we believe that they have not been able to give a compelling argument that can persuade the court otherwise other than what we have submitted.
Let's look at one of the points. Tal Becker from Israel's legal team says the entirety of South Africa's case hinges on, and I'm quoting, deliberately curated, decontextualized and manipulated description of the realities of the current hostilities. How do you respond to that statement? Did South Africa get it right?
Yeah, you will remember that we have presented a body of evidence from various UN bodies, ad hoc committees, organs of the UN. The stats that we presented and all the information has been out of most of the bodies of the UN. Some of the words that our councils were presenting before the courts were the words of the UN, including issues of humanitarian that the UN is unable to to provide humanitarian because of the ongoing siege. They can only be able to do so when there's ceasefire. So if there is anyone who has decontextualized the matter to blindfold the world not to see the reality, it is the state of Israel.
I want to tackle this issue that popped up towards the latter part of Israel's arguments about the jurisdiction issue. And it was raised by Israel saying that the ICJ lacks prima facie jurisdiction because South Africa has not shown any dispute between itself and Israel at the time that the application was submitted. Your response, sir?
Yeah, you will remember that it's a point that we raised ourselves in our first application, well articulated by our counsels, including Professor John Dugat, who argued the fact that our own central authority by the DG of DERCO had communicated with the embassy of Israel on several occasions on the matter, clearly expressing our concern with the genocidal intent and what is currently unfolding in Gaza, and that there was no response forthcoming in that regard. So we have expressed all those issues related to jurisdiction, and we are convinced that we have been able to establish the jurisdiction of the court. And on the basis that also the jurisdiction also has to emanate from the Genocide Convention issues of intent. You will remember that Advocate Ngwaidobi also argued on the genocidal intent from the various authorities in the Palestinian Authority. So we have discharged that duty.
Speaking about Advocate Ngwaidobi, the reception that the legal team received today at the OR Tambo International Airport, I guess it'll be somewhat strange for lawyers to receive such a reception. But what does it say about how the South African public is processing this case?
Yeah, indeed, it is heartwarming because this is a matter about children that can't go to school, that are being murdered, that have been cut off civilian infrastructure and services. It is not only today where it was heartwarming, but also as we're at The Hague, we received heartwarming messages from children in the occupied Gaza, the West Bank, and many parts of Palestine, that this means a lot for them. They want to return to normal life. They want cessation of this. And I do believe that even the South African public are in solidarity with the people of Palestine. So I do think that we have presented a compelling argument case anchored on the facts, the conventions of the UN, which they can be able to make a judgment that will enable the ceasefire and also to then find a lasting solution in regards to the UN resolutions with regards to this two-state solution.
Minister, I'm told my time is up with you. Thank you very much indeed, though, for making time for us tonight. We will chat, no doubt, soon with regards to when the judgment from the ICJ is announced. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right, Minister of Justice there, Ronald Lamola. Let's carry on with our discussion with Sophie Mokoena to give you some context. And something that I want to pick up with you, Sophie, is something I heard from Advocate Ngwaidobi earlier on, saying this is just an episode in a long struggle. Given what has transpired of since, where do you see, is there any diplomatic relationship now left between Israel and South Africa?
You must never say never. These are global politics. Israel can be aggrieved now, and Israel and South Africa can decide to mend their relations. Therefore, you can't say there's no way you will have synergy between the two countries in future. These are global politics. Your friends today can be your enemies tomorrow. Your enemies tomorrow can be your friends today. Remember the Second World War. Where was Russia? On whose side?
Right. Yeah.
Where was Russia? On whose side? With the Allied forces. Today, where is Russia?
Right.
So these are global politics.
Dynamics change. Soviet Union then. It's interesting the way things change. Given what was said here, what were the headlines for you from the South African team? Did they make that case adequately?
I think it was when doctor was delivering her presentation, Hassim, because she spoke about real issues, the children and the impact thereof in terms of disseminating a future generation. And then when you know, fortunately for some of us, we started this story on the 17th of October. So we've been exposed to images and information. In fact, when I read the 84-page presentation of South Africa, everything that's in there, you can go to SABC archives now and you'll get it, or Google all our scripts. We've touched on that. The same with Israel. Whatever was said in Israel, we've captured everything. Therefore, the other issue was emphasizing the intent, because that's where it's crucial. Is there an intention to commit genocide? And of course, other legal important issues that were being articulated in terms of whether that court can handle that matter.
Right. So there was a number of people that you met outside there. One of them was the former Labour leader in Britain. Sentiment on the ground?
Well, you had two groups. Those who were supporting Palestine from Thursday outside watching on the big screen, allocated a demarcated line far from the court. Right at the gate, you had a place demarcated for those who were supporting Israel, but they didn't turn up. They went to, there's a stream or a river in the Netherlands where they had a demonstration with flags there. But on Friday, they came. They went where Palestinians were on Thursday. And therefore, also there were international people who were supporting either Israel or Palestine. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, I'm sure South Africans know Jeremy Corbyn because he was there even during the struggle. He used to join those different activities at Trafalgar Square in London. Who would forget Mbeki with that background and a beret, black beret, when they were going to demonstrate at Trafalgar Square. That is why even the embassy is around Trafalgar Square. He was always there. He has done it for Ireland as well. And he was there. He has been consistent in saying that what's happening in the Middle East, particularly in Palestine, it's a genocide. And therefore, he was there to support Palestinians, particularly the South African team. And let's take a listen at what he had to say, because when the proceedings were done on Thursday, then I took my cell phone to get a soundbite quickly. Let's take a listen.
This is Jeremy Corbyn.
I thought it was a superb presentation, brilliantly put forward, very closely argued and analysed, and it wasn't sensationalised. You didn't show, as you could have done, lots of pictures of the most horrendous human suffering in Gaza. You made the point that the people of Palestine look to international justice to protect them from the horror that they're going through. And I think the whole world owes a debt of thanks to South Africa for having the courage to bring the case here to the International Court of Justice. And I've been very impressed with the presentation that's been made today.
So what about Israel's argument? They laid out, some are saying, a strong case. We will see when the ICJ delivers its verdict. Big headlines from Israel's presentation.
Dr. Tolberger, who was giving a perspective in terms of where we are. I think him insisting that Hamas must take responsibility, too, that it didn't start with what they are doing now. But the question is, you have 1,200 people killed on the 7th of October. Now we're talking about more than 20,000. And 70% are children. And as media, I deal with these things every day when they come in. We still have to see the bodies of Hamas in particular to say, this is Hamas. This is not a child. This is not a woman. This is not an ordinary citizen. So he was really making a point that, yes, they are casualties because of this. And then Professor Malcolm Shaw, an international legal guru from the UK, also making a case in terms of how the case from South Africa's side is not strong. And I think the two were the most powerful ones. And I can't leave a woman out of this, because she also did her job. And I think for me, look, because we've been privileged to some certain information as media, particularly SABC, there was a time when the embassy of Israel in South Africa invited me with very few journalists to show us a video where they were trying to make a case in terms of what transpired on the 7th and how brutal it was, and there was no way they couldn't defend their citizens. So I saw that video. So when it was presented and the oral and the written information, I could even put pictures. So I think both sides were really trying to ensure that but the issue, when they said they didn't bomb the hospitals, the archives are telling a different story.
We'll see what the court decides with regards to that. But you also had someone talking or showing their support outside as well, correct?
Yes, you know what was happening? You had families of those people who had taken hostage. So again, I took my cell phone while my colleague was inside recording the deliberations. I went there to take these pictures, many of these clips, speaking to people who were protesting in support of Israel, particularly calling for the release of the hostages. And I even saw families, they were crying. The visuals are quite dramatic that I captured. Then I spoke to him, giving him a right to reply in the same way we spoke to those who were there for Palestine. Let's take a listen at what he had to say.
Obligation of every government and every part of societies to protect innocent citizens, and South Africa would do well to protect their own citizens, and the government of Israel is doing exactly that, protecting their citizens, and it's not only their right, but it's their obligation.
Just finally, Sophie, I just want to talk a bit about the support that was shown for South Africa and that of Israel. Break it down for us.
Well, for South Africa, you have the Arab League. These are countries that are part of the Arab League. To name the few, your Saudi, your Egypt on the continent, your Algeria, your Morocco, and others in the Middle East. You had Brazil, a friend of South Africa, South, member of BRICS, and you know, now it's Lula, the president, who has good relationship with former South African President Thabo Mbeki, and now good relations with President Ramaphosa. He had a good relationship with President Zuma then. So that was Brazil, Malaysia, Namibia, neighbor, and SWAPO, it's a liberation organization. Even now, they are still trending because the statement Namibia issued yesterday countering the Germans when they were talking about them supporting Israel. And they reminded the Germans the atrocities that they've meted against different nations. I'm not even talking about the Jews. I'm just talking about what they did in Namibia. And then we have Colombia, we have Malaysia, of course, Organization of Islamic Countries, but 57 of them. But there's a decision, I think it will be communicated later, that there must be a committee, not just statements and all of that, that will look at what kind of support they can give South Africa. Because remember, this is an interim order that South Africa is asking for. But the real case, when it starts, you need evidence, you need money, you need resources, and therefore they must have a team of all those who are supporting South Africa to work out the modalities in terms of how they will support. When you go to Israel, you have clearly mainly your G7, Canada, Germany, UK, US, and others, of course. We chose these ones because these are big ones.
Right.
And people are now reminding Canada also what they've done previously to say, you mustn't forget what we've done. And Germany, unfortunately, it's both World War II, the Namibia, there's so much. And to point out, UK also, what they did in Kenya, you know, and then the United States of America, I mean, taking slaves from the continent, you know, the door of no return. So people are beginning to even go back to history to say, it's no surprise you are on this side. Even this side, people are saying, it's no surprise you are on this side. And therefore, these are generally, you know, how it looks like. Now, it's still not a case yet. This is just an order that South Africa is requesting.
We shall see. 3 most important words in politics and geopolitics. Sophie Mokoena, thank you very much indeed. Context, very important, right? All right, let's go very quickly now to what you had to say. Our regular Word on the Streets feature. We hit the streets of Johannesburg to gather your insights and perspectives and diverse views on this topic. This is what you had to say. Watch.
As a country like South Africa that's had our own apartheid for so long and how it's destroyed a lot of people's lives, we come from a place of compassion in South Africa. And I think it's coming also from a place of experience. So a lot of people can say, yes, we've got our own problems. Yes, we deal with those, but we cannot sit on the sidelines and just watch what's happening in Palestine. 23,000 lives lost. It's just, it's depressing and it's painful for all of us.
South Africa must prioritize action on local killings in South Africa and other problems and other social issues in South Africa before it goes to try and solve problems internationally. But a good international citizen, as South Africa tries to be, should also speak up and try and do what it can within its own time and resources to solve major issues internationally.
Right now, we're not in a position to fight anything. Let's just take 5 years, let's just take 5 years to fix ourselves, and then after that we can actually go and be involved in affairs when it comes to other countries, right? But for now, we're not in a position, we don't have a right to fight for anything but what we have in here and what we need to fix here.
The position that has been taken by South Africa, I think they have taken the correct direction based on our experience, because South Africa has actually experienced that kind of treatment, of being ill-treated, because we come from an apartheid background, especially the Africans, where they were bullied or abused by the Afrikaners. So based on the South African history or experience, the position they have taken now, I think is correct.
If their own cousins will not solve this problem for them, why is it South Africa, all the way here, with poor, struggling South Africans, is meddling in the issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I smell a rat. I believe South Africa is being used by somebody, perhaps a wealthy country, to do their dirty bidding for them.
South Africa is a member of the Commonwealth, you see, whereby issues concerning human rights have to be loud about it. Considering the words of Mandela when he said the liberation of South Africa won't mean anything without the liberation of Palestine.
All right, we appreciate your thoughts. Let's get straight into it. Time is no doubt of the essence. We've lined up a number of guests to get you some various perspectives. We have Avrom Krengel, is the president of the South African Zionist Federation. Thank you, sir, for joining us. On our digital wall, we have Professor Martha Bradley, is associate professor in the Department of Public Law, Faculty of Law at the University of Johannesburg. She specializes in public international law and international humanitarian law. And then we have a digital audience as well. They're going to weigh in very shortly. Thank you very much, everyone. Time, as I said, we're running out of time, but let's try to get, as I said, we're not going to solve the world's problems, but let's take a step in the direction of understanding as much as we can. Avrom, look, and no doubt the common denominator is pain on both sides, and it was acknowledged to a degree at the oral arguments at the ICJ. Having said that, so the big question would be, given what Hamas did on October 7th, was Israel's response proportional? Your take.
So, firstly, that's not what this case was about. The case is alleging genocide against Israel. That is the worst of crimes. That's 200,000 Darfurians, 1 million Rwandans, 6 million Jews. That's different to war crimes. That's different to even acts against, this is the worst crime that can be committed by a nation. So the proportionality is not even of consideration here. It's whether Israel is committing a genocide or has an intention to commit a genocide. But from the Israeli presentation, I think they made a very good case to explain how after October the 7th, with the most heinous crimes, and they described them, and they are horrific, and Sophie mentioned she's seen the videos of it. They had to remove Hamas as the controlling body of Gaza and eliminate its military capacity to attack Israel again. They assert time and again they are doing it in terms of international law. They have gone to inordinate amounts of effort and resources to relocate civilians, so they're not in the areas of fighting. They've allowed aid in, and they are of the belief that they have fulfilled their obligations in terms of international law entirely and completely. But that is not this case.
Having said that, and if that is the case of warning people ahead of time, it's seemingly not working, because we have over 20,000 people that have been killed already,
let's put,
among them women and children.
Let's put that in perspective. So South Africa has accused Israel of genocide intent. The Rwandan genocide occurred over 100 days. That's the same length of time as this war. In those 100 days, with machetes, they killed 1 million Tutsis. Israel, in 100 days, has killed, according to Hamas numbers, may be reliable, may be not, 23,000. Israel claims at least 10,000 of those are combatants. They are Hamas terrorists. So it's 15,000 people. Now, every single life is precious. Every single civilian casualty is an absolute tragedy and a disaster. But that's not genocide. That's not crimes against humanity. That's not even war crimes.
Let's get some take from Rais. Rais, let's bring you in with regards to, obviously, the proportionality is one issue. The case before the ICJ is the genocide issue. What's your take?
I think our legal team did a stunning job in arguing that in both intent and practice, Israel is guilty of genocide. I'm not going to rehash those arguments now. I actually want to bring to light the responsibility of journalism. If you are running a show on HIV and AIDS, you wouldn't have an AIDS denialist come on so that you can hear both sides. You won't go to a building that's being bombed to the ground, not one brick stands on another, and ask people going past, we can't know for certain what the reality on the ground is the building standing? And so I just want to bring to light an example from the Vietnam War in 1968. So I know Pumlani, who's also one of the guests today, is a major fan of the war criminal Henry Kissinger. But in 1968, Walter Cronkite went to Vietnam and realized that the U.S. imperialist war, the narrative that they were being fed, is one that is false. And as a journalist, made an appeal saying, you know what? I mean, it helped turn the tide of that war that the U.S. waged in Vietnam. And so I'm just calling into question, and critically giving a platform to people who are deniers of genocide. We must acknowledge this at this point. And again, to drive home the point, it would just simply be irresponsible to have a show that would be dedicated to arguing about how it is that we deal with HIV and AIDS, and then have someone on the panel who is an AIDS denialist and pretend like they have an an equally legitimate argument. I think that this is something that needs to be reflected upon in the context of journalistic integrity, because at this point, we are at a crucial point in history. Yes, the word genocide is very strong. Yes, it is a tremendous charge, but the truth is that the Israeli state is guilty of it. And this is a fact. And in engaging factual matters, this is not just the opinion of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. I think that journalists have more of a responsibility in holding power to account and speaking truth to power. And I don't think that giving an uncritical platform to Zionists is the way to do it.
Phumlani, you were mentioned. Do you think it's unfair to give both sides of the story?
Well, this is a... Firstly, I'm not going to concentrate much on the previous speaker because I think the allegations are unfounded. I think he has misunderstood my position. But my point here, the point I want to make is that I must be clear here that I have said that I am neither. You know, I'm not pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, right? I believe that the two countries, there has to be a solution, and that they must recognize one another. And both parties have a responsibility to do so. At no point did I ever come out and deny any genocide. So the previous speaker is making outrageous allegations or comments against me, and I think they're unfair. But now let me get to South Africa. Because I think here, what's happening is that South Africa is, what it has done is to align itself with Hamas, right? And this is Hamas that is backed by Iran, by the way. And the intent here is basically to, for some reason, with this whole court application, to basically help, Hamas. Because remember, if you are saying that there should be a ceasefire, at this point in time, by the way, I'm for the ceasefire, but I do believe that Israel cannot just sacrifice its citizens. There's no state that would sacrifice its citizens. Still, Ramaphosa, if South African citizens were held hostage by a foreign entity, we would expect Ramaphosa and our army to rescue our citizens. So the idea that we can just say no, they should not be rescued, that can't happen. That's unrealistic. Right. So for me, I think that this thing is we are not bringing sense, and what we are doing is to try and help Hamas in this situation. When what we should be vocal about is to say, listen, Hamas, for the ceasefire to take place, you have to release those hostages that you took during the October 7th attack.
Point taken, Phumlani. All right, let me bring in Professor Bradley to help us understand this better. Prof, good to have you on the program. Look, the big question would be: is there a plausible claim of genocidal intent? Intent being the operative word. But help us understand in terms of the law of armed conflict and urban, as it relates to urban warfare, and how this is being used as some sort of defense.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Indeed, when we listen to Israel's defense, the majority of the defense focused either on Israel acting in self-defense, which is incorrect under international law, because they are in an armed conflict situation, and that allows for military operations. So it's only in peacetime that you can use the self-defense under the UN Charter. Also, occupiers cannot use self-defense, as the law of armed conflict already does apply. So in peacetime, you have human rights law, UN law, and during armed conflict, you have the law of armed conflict. Now, when it was mentioned that as a defense that Israel is involved in urban warfare and that is particularly difficult, I have to agree in terms of urban warfare specifically being very difficult to launch military operations. Why? Because you have a density of civilian population, you have a mix of what we call military objects and civilian objects. But even though you are operating in a urban setting, and this is not unique to the situation in Gaza, this is also happening in the situation in Khartoum, where essentially fights are conducted in the cities. But this doesn't mean that the law of armed conflict does not apply. You still have to adhere to the principle of distinction, meaning I can direct my targets only at civilian objects. At military objects alone, not at civilians, except if there's the dual use exclusion. If in fact Hamas is using civilian apartment buildings to store weapons and so forth, then the nature of the object change and you can target it. You still have the proportionality test, and I think that is really where we will have to look at the evidence, because even though you have a valid target in an apartment block or a house that is Hamas, you have to do your collateral damage assessment to cause the least amount of damage. And this is a test of means. The sophisticated army, like the IDF, perhaps have more options in their arsenals than bombing. They might have more precise drone strikes and so forth. So it's a test of means, and also the precautionary principle. You have to make sure that you give notice, and that notice cannot merely be a 24-hour notice. It has to be practical for civilians to then be moved or relocate. And another duty is also the other party to the conflict must not impede or make it impossible for civilians to relocate. So it's much more difficult in terms of urban warfare. But I have to state that genocide is erga omnes. This means that this is almost the uber norm of public international law. There's no excuse. You cannot commit genocide and excuse yourself that you're fighting urban warfare. But
no matter the atrocities, no matter the crimes, and no matter the atrocities, there's no justification, correct?
There's never justification. And just to add that what Israel, I think, is trying to do is to show that we have collateral damage, and at times it's civilians, at times it is, unfortunately, civilian children, at times it's Hamas. But because urban warfare is so difficult, and this is an unfortunate consequence, but we do not have intent. And just to correct, there's the no-scale requirement for genocide. One life is sufficient to trigger genocide. Scale only comes into play when we look at crimes against humanity.
Mr. Krengel, let me bring you in. And I was listening or read something that Britain's former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, wrote earlier on. And he was saying, and I'm quoting, South Africa demonstrated what Palestinians have been trying to tell us all along. This was not a war of equals, but the systemic slaughter of the Palestinian people. How do you respond to that?
So I'm glad you brought up Jeremy Corbyn. He was invited by the South African government to attend these hearings. He is one of the most notorious anti-Semites in the world. His own Labour Party expelled him for his anti-Semitic statements and conduct and behaviour. So he's just not the right person that South Africa should have taken to argue that all this was about was the Palestinian plight.
He's not here to answer for that, but what do you make of his sentiment? What do you make of his sentiment?
So the problem everyone has here, and the professors also glossed over it, is the way Hamas fights. It is almost a parasite on the Gazan people. It has installed a military infrastructure inside and under all of Gazan civilian life. It is in schools, it is in mosques, it is in hospitals, it is in babies' bedrooms. You've seen the pictures at the Hague of weapons being stored in babies' beds. I've seen pictures of literally the tunnels coming behind a cot. So, and they have 5 stories and hundreds of kilometers of tunnels. And this is the part that I'm just mystified that no one ever brings up. If Hamas cared for its people, surely you would let them shelter with you in these tunnels where your terrorists reside. They are so well fortified that one of the hostages testified that when Israel bombs, the Hamas fighters, terrorists in these tunnels don't even wake up from their sleep. So Israel is the only party that's being asked to to comply with anything. Hamas is fighting using Gazan civilians literally and physically as its shields, and that is what has led to these horrific casualties.
Right. It is horrific what we're seeing. Zainab, let me bring you into the conversation, your take. And as we said, no matter the atrocities, there is no justification in terms of genocide. The court will determine whether there is or not provisional measures or not. But what's your take with regards to what Mr. Krengel has said?
Firstly, I just wanted to start off by saying I think what's happening here is Israel was, for a lack of better words, sort of burdened with the task of having to prove to everyone that they in fact didn't have genocidal intent. And if we have to look at the ways they tried to prove that, they went from pointing at the fact that they dropped leaflets to the fact that they made phone calls, and even like Professor Bradley mentioned earlier, the fact that they gave an advanced notice. But even during that advanced notice, it was proven that even though the notice was given for ground invasion, there was still aerial bombardments occurring on a daily basis. And we've seen videos of Israeli officials calling for genocide themselves. And I know the Israeli legal team addressed that this week, and they said, quote, oh, well, those are just individuals, and it's still like against the state of Israel's policies, and so their own war cabinet had instructed soldiers to decrease the civilians. But the problem with this argument is that it's very analogous to, for example, a serial killer coming and saying, well, I don't really want to kill civilians, I just want to incur a little hurt here and there, but I don't want to kill civilians at all. But then a few days later, we find out that the serial killer, in fact, did kill civilians, but then this killer refuses to be charged for murder on the basis that their intent was not to kill civilians, which is why I think that is very problematic to say, just because your intent was not to kill them, you still kill them. At the end of the day, there were still 23,000 Palestinians killed. And so to say that you did not have the intent, it does not matter anymore, because what matters is that these people were killed. So frankly, I don't think Israel is taking... Yes.
Point taken. Got you.
I don't think they're taking the proceedings seriously at all.
Mark, you got your hand up. Thank you, Zainab.
Yes, so I wonder if Professor Bradley will accept that Hamas committed acts of genocide. It deliberately targeted civilians. It killed them because they were Jews. Israel has responded in order to eradicate Hamas. Its public statements are that every civilian life matters, that it is a tragedy when civilians are killed, that its government policy is to take back its hostages and free Palestine from Hamas. Now, it seems that the intents there are dramatically different. Hamas really does have the genocidal intent, so I think it's important to acknowledge that that is there. Now, if South Africa was successful in this case, the first piece of relief that it asks for in its provisional measures is for Israel to stop attacking Gaza. There is no concomitant relief that Hamas would be obliged to stop attacking Israel. Now, Hamas have promised that they'll perform on October 7th time and time again. Israel is currently under attack from the north as well. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis have had to flee their homes because of attacks from the north. You are dealing with a society that is under threat. Article 51 of the UN Charter says that every state shall have the right to protect itself from any armed conflict. Now, it was pointed out by Malcolm Shaw that even Professor Lowe's textbook makes it very clear that states have the right to protect themselves not just from other states, but from other armed forces. It would be insane to say that Israel has no right to defend itself from Hamas.
All right, Mark, due to time restraints, I'll have to give Professor Martha Bradley the final word on this. Prof?
Thank you so much. So just to explain that the right to self-defense is in peacetime, and we are in an international conflict, so both sides of the conflict, both parties to the conflict can engage in military operations, but there's certain rules. In terms of calling genocide, that is not for me to do. What the court has to do is, the test is whether or not Israel has committed genocide, but whether that there was enough evidence put before the court to conclude that the required intent is plausible. And what we must remember is there's more evidence that we did not see. We only saw South Africa's application and oral arguments and Israel's oral arguments. The court may request more evidence from the parties to the conflict, and as well, there were other evidence. We heard the folder that Israel has handed over to the court. We are not privy to that. So the court will have to decide whether or not to grant interim measures and to what extent. If Israel fails, and I think that is the question that everyone has, should the court grant interim measures, what then? If Israel fails to then adhere, should there be interim measures, then the case will be referred to the Security Council. Unfortunately, we all are aware of the veto vote at Security Council level. So I myself am cautious if it comes down to that, if the allies of Israel might not, in fact, veto.
Thank you very much indeed. Time has run out. As at the top I said, we're not going to solve this issue within an hour, space of an hour, but I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of trying to understand what's at stake here. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Krengel. Appreciate your time.
The conversation,
no doubt, will continue on this channel. All right, before we go, here's my take. Look, we tend to look at this war through the lens of our cognitive biases, possibly our own religious persuasions, our deep convictions and beliefs, and that's fine, right? But shouldn't the welfare of the innocent also be top of mind on both sides? One thing that is clearly agreed, both on Israel, South Africa, Palestine, as heard during the oral arguments at the World Court, is that the civilian suffering in this war, like in all wars, is tragic and heartbreaking. And there's a lot of disagreement as to who's right and who's wrong, and who has the moral high ground and who doesn't. Pain is the common denominator. So the question is, how do we put purpose to pain? Perhaps it can be used as a springboard to look for better avenues of opportunity that this region can take advantage of on the road to durable peace in the Middle East. And that's my take. If you miss anything with regards to the show, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube. Sports Live up next. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.